So now here's something I've talked about, like I said, with my guys many times. Where does Floyd stand up all time against the elite welterweights of history, right? So I'm gonna pick four of them. The last guy was went from welter up to middleweight. So, but we'll get there, right? These are the guys that we call the four kings of the 1980s. Obviously, Sugar Ray Leonard, who, in my estimation, is probably the best welterweight of all time. For me, he is the most perfect blend of speed, and that's speed of hand, speed of foot, reflexes, as well as power, knockout power. He was able to carry power from lightweight all the way up to middleweight. And to me, that's something that's tremendous because if you look at a guy like Floyd, when you talk about him, people will point to the fact that, at lightweight and junior welter, he was actually knocking guys out. And he's got a fair amount of wins, some impressive stoppages on his resume up to that point. But it was odd because he couldn't carry the power with him when he got up to 147 and 154. And that's when you really see the ultra uber defensive Floyd, who was the king of shoulder roll, slipping the head, and then pot shotting back, 1-2 punches, not really trying to engage, not really doing anything dangerous, but arguably the best counter puncher in history. That's when you saw that. But you look at a guy like Sugar Ray Leonard, he had the speed, he had the power. So, that's awesome. Next, Tommy Hitman Hearns. Thomas Hitman Hearns was another one. He had speed, not to the level of Sugar Ray, and he didn't really have the foot speed like Sugar Ray. His hands were close, but he did have speed, but he had tremendous power. And again, that's power from welterweight all the way up to light heavy, and that was a power that he was able to carry with him and continue knocking guys out all the way up. I think he boxed professionally from I want to say 81 or 82 all the way up to 2006. He had his final fight. So, um, Tommy Hitman Hearns, just a tremendous, tremendous fighter. And the first fighter, coincidentally, ever to win world championships in 5 weight classes. All right. That's something Floyd always talks about. He won championships in 5 weight classes. But if you're on a trivia game show, a sports trivia game show, now you know Tommy Hitman Hearns was the first fighter to do that. Okay. Third of the four kings, Roberto Duran, man with the hands of stone. To me, this guy, he was just incredibly tough. If you recollect, I don't know how old you may be or how much you're into boxing. He was the first man to beat Sugar Ray Leonard as a professional. And it was just his ruthlessness and his continuing drive, always coming forward, always coming forward, always coming forward. That's the third of the four kings. And the fourth king, marvelous Marvin Hagler. Rest in peace, Marvin Hagler. Spent most of his time at middleweight and was just a tremendous, tremendous champion. I think he was undefeated for like 12 years before Sugar Ray Leonard managed to beat him in a narrowly contested fight, which so soured him on the sport of boxing. He retired and never came back to the ring. But marvelous Marvin Hagler, excuse me, was another tremendous, tremendous fighter. And his fight with Tommy Hitman Hearns for the middleweight championship um, boasts a first round that most people who are into boxing argue as boxing's greatest round in history. And it was just it was 3 rounds of carnage in terms of two guys really going at each other, and he was able to, in the third round, put Tommy Hitman Hearns away, which was not at all an easy task. Okay, especially when around that time when Tommy Hearns was pretty much at the peak of his powers, and he was able to knock the Hitman out in the third round. So those are the four kings. I'll run through them again for you: Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hitman Hearns, Roberto Duran, the man with the hands of stone, and marvelous Marvin Hagler. So where does Floyd Mayweather Jr. come into this? The whole discussion was where kind of he ranks among the all-time great welterweights. And let's be real here, okay? Floyd is all-time great. Only a fool would argue that he's not. But is he the so-called TBE? He likes to say he's TBE, as in the best ever, where some people use the acronym GOAT for greatest of all time. He likes to say TBE, the best ever. Okay, he isn't the best ever. He isn't even the best welterweight ever, and to me, it's not even close, right? So the reason I brought up the four kings was because those are the four best fighters arguably ever in that weight class. Now, again, Marvelous Marvin Hagler spent very little time there. Maybe among that weight class, you also say at some point Manny Pacquiao is probably up there. I don't know if he's up there with those guys, although that those would all make compelling matchups with a prime Pacquiao. Sugar Ray Robinson probably should be up there. But when we mention the Four Kings, I say that because those guys were all in the same weight class around the same time. Again, besides Marvelous Marvin Hagler. But back to Floyd. So let's go ahead and actually break down the matches, the one-on-one matches between those two. And I'm not going to take it too far, but this is the one that I always like to watch and I always like to point to, okay? Sugar Ray Leonard, elite. When I say elite, elite hand and foot speed, arguably the fastest boxer in history in terms of hand and foot speed. Now, in pure hand speed, Amir Khan may rival him. That dude, his hands are like lightning. Too bad his chin is like glass. But Amir Khan may rival Sugar Ray in terms of elite hand speed, but it's a fair statement to say that Sugar Ray is probably the fastest boxer of all time. His hand and feet were tremendous, and that speed would probably allow him to trap and hit Floyd Mayweather Jr., who again is such a tremendous boxer, and guys get really frustrated with their inability to hit him with the shoulder roll, the head movement, his defensive ability, his reflexes. Now, the thing about Sugar Ray is Sugar Ray Leonard was so fast that he probably would have been able to get into Floyd's defense and crack it, which is something obviously no other fighter in the 50 fights he fought was able to do. But I do believe that Sugar Ray Leonard probably would have been able to do that. And a quick side note, had Floyd fought a prime Manny instead of stringing him along for 5 years, as well as fighting an older Sugar Shane Mosley, if he'd have fought a prime Sugar Shane Mosley, I do believe both of those guys probably had the speed and the ability to have cracked his defensive code. But you know, that's easy enough to say. Again, 50 fighters weren't able to do it. So um, I definitely believe that Sugar Ray Leonard beats Floyd probably rather handily. The difference with Sugar Ray is also to go with along with all that speed, he had genuine knockout power. I believe he knocked out Floyd Mayweather Sr. So not to say that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is not a far superior fighter than his father was, but you get the point. I definitely think that Sugar Ray beats Floyd and beats him easily. I don't know that he knocks him out, but I think he beats him by a wide margin on the card. I think he would just be able to pick him off with relative ease. And Floyd being such a counterpunch artist, and again, in my estimation, a guy who lacks the heart and the warrior spirit to really trade and walk through the fire, I don't think he would do what it takes to win a fight against a Sugar Ray Leonard. Moving right along, Tommy Hitman Hearns. We talked about it. Ridiculous knockout power from welterweight all the way up to light heavy, and first guy to win championships in 5 weight classes. I just don't think that Floyd had the power at 147 or 154 to keep Tommy Hitman Hearns off of him. And Hearns had enough speed and enough power that I believe he definitely would have cracked Floyd's, seemingly impenetrable guard, and he probably would have knocked him out. I believe that. Um, Roberto Duran. This one is interesting. They always talk about styles making fights. I see Roberto Duran. My analogy to him, my comparison is he's the Smoking Joe Frazier of the lower weight classes. Why do I say that? Smoking Joe's thing was he was going to keep coming until he broke you down. Punish the body, punish the body, punish the body. Especially if you're a fighter that moves a lot, stays on your feet, on your quote unquote bicycle, like Floyd does. Roberto Duran was going to break you down by breaking down your body. And I truly believe that, him being a brutal and vicious body puncher, along with the ability to really go to the head when your arms start coming down, I think he would have been able to stop Floyd. And again, at 157, 147, and 154, Floyd's brittle hands and lack of true power would not have been able to keep Roberto Duran honest and keep him off him. That's my feeling. Finally, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, the fourth of the Four Kings. Floyd wouldn't take that fight. I mean, that's all there is to it. But let's say for argument that he did, what he would do is what he always does, and he would try to stipulate maybe a catch weight of 154 and weight drain Marvelous Marvin down to that weight to make him take that fight. But Hagler was just too tough, man. That's all there is to it. That's another one. He had power, he had heart. He was just going to keep coming, and I don't believe, again, whether it's 157 or 154, Floyd just doesn't have the power to keep guys like that off of him, right? So at the end of the day, Floyd has tremendous skills. Floyd is, again, arguably the best defensive fighter ever. If you want to say Sweet Pete Whitaker, if you want to say Bernard Hopkins, that's cool, right? You can say those. But Floyd is arguably best defensive fighter ever. CompuBox says that he is in terms of opponents' punch connect, and that's fine. But I just don't see him having the heart, the warrior spirit. He doesn't have that thing inside that fighters have, right? I call Floyd a tremendous boxer, one of the best boxers of all time, but I don't view him as a fighter. Again, you look at a Sugar Ray Leonard, you look at Tommy Hitman Hearns, you look at Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Those dudes could all box, but they were all fighters deep down, right? They were coming to fight you. So they could box you, but they could also fight you. And I think Floyd, that's where, to me, is his fatal weakness against guys of this caliber and of this era, is that all those guys could fight you and box you, and Floyd can only box you. I don't believe he can fight you. So at the end of the day, I just don't see him having the heart to walk through the fire and beat guys of this caliber.